My father's words hit like thunderclap during what should have been a normal family dinner. "You are too ungrateful to be part of this family," he said, pointing directly at me. I was just 19 then, old enough to know better, but young enough to feel the sting. The room fell silent as his words dangled, clatter of plates fading away. My siblings avoided my gaze, waiting to see if I would break. But instead of breaking, a quiet fire kindled inside me. I looked him in the eyes and said, "Then I'll prove my worth where it counts." That moment marked the start of a battle I never expected but would win. I began recording every interaction, gathering proof of years of contributions and sacrifices ignored. If you're watching now, comment below where you're from and subscribe for stories on family and justice. This is only the beginning. It was a turning point where hurt became resolve. Nothing would stop me from claiming the respect I earned. I started reaching out to professionals for legal advice and gathered financial records to support my case. Friends and mentors offered encouragement. When family turned away, their support gave me the strength to keep fighting, and so began. To understand how we reached that explosive dinner confrontation, you need to know the history that built up to its years of systematic favoritism, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation that I had normalized as just how our family worked. Looking back now with adult clarity, I can see the patterns that shaped my childhood and teenage years. Patterns that would eventually drive me to seek justice through the courts. My father, Robert, was a successful contractor who built his reputation on being demanding, precise, and unforgiving of mistakes. Those same qualities that made him respected in business made him a difficult parent, but only for some of his children. My older sister Jessica could do no wrong in his eyes. When she dropped out of college to pursue an art degree he initially opposed, he eventually funded her entire education and even helped her open a gallery. When she crashed his truck at 17, he laughed it off as a learning experience and bought her a new car the following month. My younger brother, Marcus, received similar treatment. His poor grades were dismissed as evidence that traditional school just isn't challenging enough for creative minds like his. When Marcus racked up $3,000 in credit card debt during his freshman year of college, my father paid it off without question and increased his monthly allowance. "Boys will be boys," he'd say, with a chuckle that never extended to my mistakes. But for me, as a middle child, everything was different. When I made honor roll throughout high school, the response was a grunt and reminder that grades were just the bare minimum of what's expected. When I worked part-time jobs throughout high school to save money for college, my father criticized me for not focusing enough on academics. When I received a partial scholarship to State University, he complained about having to cover the remaining costs. Despite spending twice as much on Jessica's art school tuition without complaint, the gaslighting was subtle but consistent. When I pointed out these double standards, I was told I was being dramatic or looking for things to complain about. My mother, Patricia, enabled his behavior with her own brand of dismissive comments. "Your father has high expectations for you because he knows you're capable of more," she'd say, as if systematic unfairness was somehow a compliment. When I tried to document these patterns by keeping a journal of incidents, she found it during a room cleaning and accused me of obsessing over negativity instead of focusing on gratitude. The financial disparity became impossible to ignore as we all reached adulthood. While Jessica received help with her gallery down payment and Marcus got his student loans paid off as a graduation gift, I was expected to handle my own expenses. When I graduated debt-free through scholarships and work-study programs, the achievement was met with indifference. "That's what responsible people do," my father said, while simultaneously praising Marcus for finally getting serious about his future. When he managed to pass his senior year classes, my attempts to earn approval became increasingly desperate and costly. I loaned Jessica $5,000 when her gallery was struggling, money I had saved for a down payment on my first apartment. When she failed to repay it as promised, my father suggested I shouldn't lend money I couldn't afford. To lose, implying that my financial planning was somehow flawed. When Marcus needed help moving twice in 1 year, I took vacation days from work to help him, only to have my father comment that I seemed to have too much free time. Rather than acknowledging my sacrifice, the most painful realization was discovering how differently my achievements were discussed with extended family and friends. At family gatherings, Jessica's gallery showings were announced with pride. Marcus's latest creative ventures were celebrated enthusiastically. But my promotion to department supervisor at the engineering firm where I worked was mentioned only in passing, if at all. When relatives congratulated me directly, my father would quickly redirect conversation to his other children's accomplishments. The emotional manipulation extended to holiday and family events. My contributions, whether financial, logistical, or simply showing up consistently, were treated as obligations rather than gifts. When I arranged and paid for my parents' 20th anniversary dinner, the response was criticism about the restaurant choice rather than gratitude for the gesture. When I missed one family barbecue due to a work commitment, I was lectured about family priorities, while Jessica and Marcus regularly canceled plans without consequence. By the time I reached 19, I had spent years trying to decode the rules of a game that was rigged against me. I had internalized the belief that I was somehow inherently less worthy of support, praise, or basic respect than my siblings. The systematic nature of this treatment documented in years of family photos where I was consistently positioned at the edges, family stories where my role was minimized, and financial records showing clear disparities in parental investments created a foundation of hurt and resentment that would eventually explode into that fateful dinner confrontation. What I didn't realize then was that this pattern had a name: scapegoating. And what my father didn't realize was that his ungrateful middle child had been quietly documenting everything, preparing for the day when I would finally demand the respect I had always deserved. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Saturday evening in October, during what was supposed to be a celebration of my father's promotion to regional manager at his construction company. My mother had invited extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins-long, with some of my father's business associates and their wives. I had contributed $300 toward catering costs and spent my entire Saturday morning helping set up tables and decorations in their backyard. The evening started pleasantly enough. I made conversation with relatives I rarely saw, helped serve drinks, and genuinely enjoyed catching up with my cousin Dave, who had just started his own accounting practice. Around 7:30, as guests mingled with plates of food, my father stood up to give what I assumed would be a standard thank you speech to everyone for coming. Instead, he launched into a narrative about family values, hard work, and gratitude. That quickly took a dark turn. Some people in this world understand what it means to appreciate what they've been given, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. They understand that family means supporting each other, being grateful for opportunities, and contributing without expecting constant recognition. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach as his eyes found mine across the crowd. What came next was a calculated humiliation disguised as a life lesson. Then you have others, he continued, who take and take, who complain about everything, who think the world owes them something just for existing. People who are so focused on what they think they deserve that they can't see all the ways they've been blessed. His gaze remained fixed on me as murmurs started among the guests. Some people are just too ungrateful to appreciate being part of a loving family. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 adults stood frozen, unsure whether they had just witnessed a general philosophical statement or a targeted attack. I knew exactly which it was, and so did everyone else who had been watching my father's expression and body language. My aunt, Carol, later told me she had never felt more uncomfortable at a family gathering. My father's business partner, Jim Morrison, would later testify that he found the speech unnecessarily harsh and inappropriately personal for what was supposed to be a celebration. But in that moment, all I felt was the familiar cocktail of shame, anger, and helplessness that had defined my relationship with my father for years. Except this time, something was different. Instead of shrinking away or making excuses to leave early, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, something I had started doing during family interactions after advice from my therapist about documenting patterns of emotional abuse. "Dad?" said, my voice carrying clearly across the now quiet yard. "Are you talking about me specifically, or is this just general philosophy?" The question was deliberately direct, designed to force him to either back down from his implications or commit fully to his attack. His response sealed both our fates. "If the shoe fits, son, wear it." Maybe it's time you looked in the mirror and asked yourself what you bring to this family besides complaints and expectations. The recording captured everything: his words, the shocked gasps from guests, even my cousin Dave's whispered "Jesus Christ, Robert" in the background. In that moment, surrounded by witnesses and with documented proof of his public humiliation campaign, I made the decision that would define the next chapter of both our lives. "You know what, Dad? You're right. It's time I looked in the mirror. And it's time everyone else got to see exactly what I've brought to this family with receipts." The war had officially begun. The Monday morning after the dinner confrontation, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching family law attorneys in my area. The recording from Saturday night played on repeat in my head, but now, instead of feeling humiliated, I felt focused. My father had finally said the quiet part out loud in front of witnesses, and I was going to make sure everyone understood exactly what that meant. My first consultation was with Jennifer Martinez, a family law attorney who specialized in cases involving financial disputes between family members. When I played her the recording from the dinner, her reaction was immediate and professional. "This is emotional abuse with witnesses," she said, taking notes as we spoke, "combined with documented financial contributions and disparate treatment. You have grounds for several potential legal actions." Jennifer explained that while suing family members was complex, cases involving systematic financial exploitation and emotional abuse had legal precedent. She recommended I gather comprehensive documentation before we discussed specific legal strategies. The consultation fee was $200 I couldn't really afford, but her validation that my experiences constituted actual legal wrongs was worth every penny. The evidence gathering became my obsession. I started with financial records, printing every bank statement, receipt, and transaction record dating back 5 years. The numbers told a stark story: over $18,000 in direct financial contributions to family members, from Jessica's gallery loan to covering Marcus's emergency car repairs when his transmission failed. Not $1 had been repaid. Despite repeated promises, I documented the disparities systematically. While I paid for my own college entirely through scholarships and part-time work, my parents had spent over $40,000 on Jessica's art education and another $32,000 paying off Marcus's student loans. When I calculated the Christmas and birthday gifts over the past 5 years, the differences were shocking. Jessica averaged $400 in gifts annually. Marcus received about $350, while my gifts rarely exceeded $100. The witness statements came easier than I expected. My cousin Dave, who had been standing right beside me during the dinner speech, immediately agreed to provide a sworn affidavit describing what he had witnessed. "That was character assassination, not a celebration," he wrote in his statement. Robert specifically targeted his son in front of family and business associates in a way that was clearly designed to humiliate him. My former college roommate, Mike Chen, provided documentation of conversations where I had described the family dynamics and their impact on my mental health. His statement included specific dates and details of incidents I had shared with him, creating a timeline of emotional abuse that extended back years. Even my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, agreed to provide a statement about concerns she had noted. Regarding my family relationships during my senior year, the most powerful evidence came from my own therapy records. Dr. Sarah Walsh, the therapist I had been seeing for 6 months, provided clinical documentation of depression and anxiety symptoms directly related to family dynamics. Her professional assessment stated that my description of family interactions was consistent with systematic emotional abuse and scapegoating patterns typical of dysfunctional family systems. As the evidence pile grew thicker, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when dealing with my family. Confidence. For the first time, I had professional validation that my perceptions were accurate. Legal experts confirming that my experiences constituted actual wrongs, and documented proof that the pattern of mistreatment was real and measurable. The scared, desperate young man who had stood humiliated in his parents' backyard was transforming into someone ready to fight back with facts, documentation, and legal backing. My father was about to learn that his ungrateful son had been paying very careful attention to everything. 3 weeks after the dinner confrontation, I walked into the county courthouse with Jennifer Martinez to file a lawsuit that would shatter my family's comfortable denial forever. The legal documents we submitted that Tuesday morning were comprehensive. Claims for emotional distress, financial exploitation, and systematic emotional abuse, backed by 43 pages of evidence ranging from bank statements to witness affidavits to professional assessments. The filing made local news within hours. Local man sues parents for emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Read the headline in the County Herald. And suddenly, my private family dysfunction was public record. Jennifer had warned me this would happen. Court filings are public. Documents and family lawsuits always attract media attention. But reading about my own life in the newspaper was surreal and terrifying. My father's reaction was swift and predictable. He hired Thompson and Associates, the most expensive defense firm in the county, and immediately launched a counter-narrative through their public relations team. This frivolous lawsuit represents the entitled attitude of a young man who can't accept that his parents raised him with boundaries and expectations. Read their official statement. Robert and Patricia Thompson are devastated that their son would exploit the legal system for what amounts to ordinary family disagreements. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 15th, exactly 1 month after I filed. Walking into Judge Margaret Williams' courtroom that morning, I felt the weight of every family gathering, every dismissed achievement, and every dollar I had contributed without recognition. My parents sat across the aisle with their legal team. My father's expression, a mixture of anger and disbelief that I had actually followed through on my threat. Judge Williams, a veteran family court judge with 23 years on the bench, reviewed our evidence packet with careful attention to detail. When Jennifer presented the audio recording from the dinner party, the judge listened to the entire 3-minute clip without interruption. The silence in the courtroom as my father's voice played back his calculated humiliation was deafening. Counselor Martinez, Judge Williams said after reviewing the financial documentation, "Your client has presented what appears to be a substantial pattern of disparate treatment and documented financial contributions. This is not the frivolous family squabble the defense has characterized it as." Her preliminary ruling allowed the case to proceed to discovery, meaning my parents would be required to provide their own financial records and submit to depositions under oath. The defense team's strategy immediately shifted after that hearing. Thompson and Associates' second statement, released that evening, took a different tone. While the Thompson family maintains that this lawsuit is unnecessary, They are confident that the legal process will reveal the full context of normal family dynamics and parental decision-making. The word frivolous notably disappeared from their language. Local media coverage began to shift as well. Legal analyst Robert Shaw, interviewed by Channel 7 News, noted that Judge Williams is known for dismissing truly frivolous cases quickly. The fact that she's allowing extensive discovery suggests there may be substantive legal issues here. The story was no longer about an entitled young man making unreasonable demands. It was about a family dispute with potentially serious legal implications. My extended family's reactions ranged from supportive to horrified. My cousin Dave publicly backed my decision, telling reporters that family loyalty shouldn't require accepting emotional abuse. But my father's sister, Aunt Linda, gave interviews calling the lawsuit a betrayal of everything family should represent, and questioning whether I had been influenced by outside parties with their own agendas. The most significant development came when Judge Williams ordered both sides to participate in court-supervised mediation before proceeding to trial. Family disputes of this nature often benefit from structured dialogue facilitated by neutral professionals, she explained during the hearing. However, if mediation fails to produce resolution, this court is prepared to examine the evidence and render appropriate judgment. For the first time since that humiliating dinner party, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. The legal system was treating my claim seriously. The media was asking hard questions, and his expensive lawyers were no longer dismissing the case as an easy win. The battle lines were drawn, but now both sides understood this was going to be a real fight with real consequences. The weeks between filing the lawsuit and the preliminary hearing were the most emotionally turbulent of my life. What I thought would be a straightforward legal process became a psychological battlefield, where every relationship in my life was tested, every decision questioned, and every moment of doubt amplified by well-meaning people who couldn't understand why I wouldn't just work things out privately. The family pressure campaign began immediately. My mother called 17 times the first week after the filing, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful guilt trips to barely contained rage. "How could you do this to your own parents?" she sobbed in one message. "We sacrificed everything for you children, and this is how you repay us." By the fourth day, her tone had shifted to threats. "You're destroying this family for everyone. Your siblings will never forgive you for dragging our private business into public like this." My father's approach was more calculated. He enlisted flying monkeys family members who would deliver his messages while maintaining plausible deniability. Uncle Tom called to suggest I was having some kind of breakdown and needed professional help rather than legal action. Aunt Linda sent a series of text messages explaining how disappointed my late grandmother would be in my behavior, carefully targeting the guilt I carried about missing her final months due to work commitments. The most painful pressure came from Marcus, my younger brother, who had always benefited from the family dynamics I was challenging. "Dude, you're tearing apart our family over money," he said during a tense phone conversation I recorded for my own protection. "Mom's not sleeping, Dad's drinking more, and now we can't have normal family gatherings because of your lawsuit. Is proving you're right really worth destroying everything?" But for every family member pressuring me to drop the case, others stepped forward with surprising support. My cousin Dave not only provided a witness statement, but actively defended my decision at family gatherings I wasn't invited to anymore. Someone needed to call out the obvious favoritism, he told Aunt Linda during a recorded argument at my uncle's house. "We've all watched Robert treat Mark differently for years, and none of us had the courage to say anything." My therapist, Dr. Sarah Walsh, became my anchor during this period. Our sessions, documented in her clinical notes, showed the classic symptoms of someone breaking free from a dysfunctional family system: anxiety about standing up to authority figures, mixed with relief at finally being heard and validated. Mark is experiencing the natural psychological consequences of challenging an abusive dynamic, she wrote in her treatment summary. The family's escalating pressure tactics are consistent with patterns observed when scapegoated family members refuse to maintain their assigned role. The support from outside my family was overwhelming and unexpected. My college roommate Mike flew in from Denver for a weekend, spending his own money to be there during the preliminary hearing. "You're doing something I could never do with my own toxic family," he told me over dinner. "You're standing up for yourself instead of just accepting that abuse is normal." My workplace colleagues rallied around me in ways I never anticipated. When the stress began affecting my performance at work, my supervisor, Jennifer Rodriguez, suggested I take advantage of our company's employee assistance program rather than disciplining me for decreased productivity. "Everyone can see you're going through something difficult," she said during our meeting. "We want to support you, not add to your stress." The documentation she provided to HR showed how my work quality had declined specifically during periods of intense family pressure. Creating a paper trail that would later support my emotional distress claims. The most meaningful support came from unexpected sources. Mrs. Henderson, my high school English teacher, reached out after seeing the news coverage. "I always wondered what was going on at home," she wrote in an email that brought me to tears. "You were such a bright, motivated student, but you always seemed to carry weight that your peers didn't have. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, even though it must be incredibly difficult." Even some of my father's business associates quietly expressed support. Jim Morrison, who had witnessed the dinner party humiliation, called to offer his testimony. "What your father did that night was wrong, Mark," he said. "I've been in business with him for 15 years, and I've watched him treat you differently than your siblings at every company event." Someone needed to call it out. The emotional turmoil was real, and exhausting sleepless nights wondering if I was destroying my family for nothing. Anxiety attacks before every therapy session, and constant second-guessing of my decision to pursue legal action. But gradually, as more people validated my experiences and offered support, I began to understand that I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting against a system of emotional abuse that had gone unchallenged for too long, and that others had noticed but felt powerless to address. The scared, isolated young man who had filed that first lawsuit was slowly becoming someone with a support network, professional validation, and the strength to continue fighting for the respect he deserved. The breakthrough came during the court-ordered mediation session in December. Professional mediator Dr. Robert Chen had reviewed all case materials beforehand, and his opening statement set a tone my father clearly hadn't expected. "We're here because there's documented evidence of systematic disparate treatment within a family unit," he began. "This isn't about normal parent-child disagreements. It's about patterns of behavior that have caused measurable harm." The mediation room felt like a pressure cooker as Dr. Chen methodically went through the evidence. When he read aloud my father's recorded statement from the dinner party, followed by the financial documentation showing $18,000 in unreimbursed contributions, the silence was deafening. My mother, who had maintained that I was exaggerating everything, visibly flinched when confronted with bank records that couldn't be dismissed or fracked. The first crack in my family's united front came when Dr. Chen asked my father to explain the rationale behind paying for Jessica's and Marcus's education while expecting me to handle my own expenses. "I thought he was more capable of managing independently," my father said, an answer that immediately backfired. Dr. Chen's follow-up was swift. "So you're saying you provided more support to the children you believed were less capable, while withholding support from the one you believed was most capable? How is that equitable parenting?" My father's attorney tried to intervene, but the damage was done. In trying to justify his actions, my father had inadvertently admitted to the very favoritism we were claiming. Dr. Chen's notes from that session, later submitted to Judge Williams, documented what he termed clear acknowledgement of differential treatment based on assumed capabilities rather than needs or fairness. The financial expert testimony had been devastating to their case. CPA Maria Rodriguez had analyzed 5 years of family financial records and found patterns that were impossible to explain away. The defendant parents provided an average of $8,000 annually in direct financial support to 2 children, while providing $0 in comparable support to the plaintiff. Her report stated, "This represents systematic financial favoritism that cannot be attributed to different needs or circumstances." But the most powerful moment came when my cousin Dave testified about family dynamics he had observed over years of gatherings. "Mark was always treated like the family disappointment," he said, under oath. "His achievements were minimized, his contributions were ignored, and his siblings' failures were excused in ways that his never were. It was obvious to everyone, except apparently Mark's parents." The media attention had also shifted dramatically in my favor. Legal analyst Sarah Chen appeared on 3 local news programs explaining that family law courts are increasingly recognizing emotional abuse as legitimate legal harm, especially when combined with financial exploitation. When Channel 7 News interviewed random people on the street about the case, 63% supported my decision to seek legal redress. The pressure was clearly getting to my parents. My mother had started attending therapy sessions, something Dr. Walsh's records showed had been recommended to me for years, but never pursued by my parents for themselves. More tellingly, my father had begun reaching out to extended family members, trying to rebuild relationships he had previously dismissed as unimportant. Uncle Tom later testified that my father had called him specifically to ask, "Do you think I've been too hard on Mark over the years?" The most significant victory was when Judge Williams denied my parents' motion to dismiss the case. In her written ruling, she stated, "The evidence presented demonstrates a pattern of behavior that, if proven at trial, would constitute actionable emotional distress and financial exploitation. The plaintiff has established sufficient grounds for his claims to proceed to full adjudication." My father's expensive legal team was forced to shift from dismissal tactics to damage control. Their latest settlement offered $25,000 plus a written apology was the first acknowledgement that they knew they were losing. Jennifer Martinez advised against accepting it. "They're scared," she said. "If they're offering money now, it means they know what a jury will think of the evidence." The tide had turned completely. What started as my father's dismissive attitude toward a frivolous lawsuit had become a desperate attempt to limit legal and public relations damage. The scared young man who had filed the original complaint was now the one with momentum, evidence, and the legal system on his side. The trial took place over 3 days in February. And walking into Judge Williams' courtroom that final morning, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation that had been building for months. The evidence phase had been completed. Closing. Arguments delivered. And now we waited for the judge's decision in what had become the most public family dispute in our county's recent history. Judge Williams took her time reviewing her notes before speaking, the silence stretching long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious but determined. "This case has required careful consideration of both legal precedent and basic principles of family equity," she began. "The evidence presented demonstrates a clear pattern of disparate treatment that goes well beyond normal variations in parenting style." Judge Williams continued, "The financial documentation shows systematic favoritism that resulted in measurable economic harm to the plaintiff. The emotional abuse allegations are supported by credible witness testimony, professional assessment, and the defendant's own recorded admissions. The specific findings were devastating to my parents' case." Judge Williams ruled that the $18,000 in unreimbursed financial contributions constituted unjust enrichment, compounded by the systematic exclusion from family financial support that had been freely given to siblings. The court finds that the plaintiff was exploited as a source of financial contribution while being denied reciprocal family support, she stated. On the emotional distress claims, her ruling was even more comprehensive. The evidence demonstrates a deliberate pattern of public humiliation, systematic devaluation of achievements, and psychological manipulation designed to maintain the plaintiff in a subordinate family role. This constitutes actionable, emotional abuse that has caused documented psychological harm. The financial judgment was significant: $37,000 in damages, including the $18,000 in unreimbursed contributions, $10,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress, and $9,000 in punitive damages to deter future conduct of this nature. But more important than the money was the written finding that my claims were credible, well-documented, and legally justified. My father's reaction was immediate and telling. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair, and stormed out of the courtroom before Judge Williams had finished reading her verdict. My mother remained seated, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't follow him. Later, she would tell reporters that she was devastated by the court's findings, but needed time to process what we've learned about our family dynamics. The courtroom was packed with family members, media representatives, and legal observers who had followed the case. When Judge Williams finished her ruling, the silence was profound. Then my cousin Dave started clapping, and gradually others joined in, not a celebration of family destruction, but acknowledgement that justice had been served. The immediate aftermath was surreal. Local news stations had covered the trial daily, and the verdict made regional headlines. Judge rules in favor of son in unprecedented family abuse case. Legal experts interviewed by Channel 7 called it a landmark decision that recognizes emotional abuse and systematic favoritism as legitimate legal harms. My parents' different reactions revealed everything about their characters. My father doubled down on his denial, telling the County Herald that no judge can dictate how parents raise their children, and that he would appeal this ridiculous decision until it's overturned. His attorney, however, quietly advised him that appeals would be expensive and unlikely to succeed given the strength of the evidence. My mother, by contrast, seemed genuinely shaken by the verdict. In her statement to the press, she said, "This has been a wake-up call about patterns in our family that I was blind to. I need to understand how we got to this point and what I can do to make things right." Dr. Walsh later noted that this was the first time my mother had acknowledged any responsibility for the family dynamics. The financial aspect of the judgment was important, but the psychological impact was transformative. For the first time in my life, an authority figure had listened to my experiences, examined the evidence, and officially declared that my perceptions were accurate and my treatment was wrong. The validation was worth more than any monetary damages. The extended family reactions were mixed but increasingly supportive. Uncle Tom publicly apologized for pressuring me to drop the case, saying he hadn't understood the full extent of the situation until hearing all the evidence presented at trial. Even some of my father's business associates distanced themselves from him after the verdict, with Jim Morrison telling reporters that the trial had revealed concerning patterns that were hard to ignore once laid out systematically. Perhaps most importantly, the verdict sent a message to other adults' children dealing with family abuse that their experiences were valid, and that legal remedies existed for systematic emotional and financial exploitation. I received dozens of emails from people sharing similar stories and thanking me for showing that families can be held accountable for their actions. The scared young man who had stood humiliated at that dinner party 8 months earlier had become someone who could stand in a courtroom and watch a judge declare that his worth was legally recognized, his contributions officially acknowledged, and his treatment fundamentally wrong. Justice had been served, but the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. 6 months after Judge Williams delivered her verdict, I moved into a bright two-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from downtown, the first living space I had ever chosen and furnished entirely for myself. The security deposit and first month's rent came from the court judgment, but more importantly, the apartment represented something I had never had before. A space where I set the rules, where my achievements were celebrated rather than minimized, and where I could build the relationships I wanted without fear of judgment or manipulation. The healing process was documented through weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Walsh, whose treatment notes showed steady progress from the acute stress of the trial period to what she termed post-traumatic growth. Mark is developing a strong sense of personal boundaries and learning to recognize healthy versus unhealthy relationship patterns, she wrote in her 6-month assessment. The legal victory provided external validation that has accelerated his internal healing process significantly. The most surprising development was my evolving relationship with my mother. 3 weeks after the trial, she called to ask if we could meet for coffee-neutral territory where we could talk without my father's influence. That first conversation, awkward and painful, led to regular monthly meetings where she gradually acknowledged patterns she had previously denied or minimized. I spent so many years enabling your father's behavior because it was easier than confronting it, she admitted during our 4th meeting, a conversation I recorded with her permission. When I saw all that evidence laid out in court, I couldn't pretend anymore that it was normal family dynamics. Her willingness to attend joint therapy sessions with Dr. Walsh marked the beginning of the first genuinely honest relationship we had ever had. My father, predictably, took the opposite approach. He refused all attempts at communication and told extended family members that he had no son who would betray his own family in court. His rigid stance actually made my healing easier. I no longer had to navigate the exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment that had characterized our relationship for years. The impact on my siblings was complex and ongoing. Marcus initially maintained loyalty to our father, publicly supporting his decision to appeal the verdict. But privately, he began reaching out through text messages that revealed his own confusion about family dynamics. He was seeing clearly for the first time. "I'm starting to realize how differently you were treated," he wrote in one message I kept as documentation. "I don't know how to process that yet, but I'm sorry I didn't see it before." Jessica's response was more immediate and supportive. She called 2 days after the verdict to apologize for years of accepting advantages she now recognized as unfair. "I should have spoken up when I saw how Dad treated you differently," she said. "I was so focused on not rocking the boat that I didn't think about how you must have felt watching me get help you never received." She offered to repay the $5,000 I had loaned her years earlier, money that had become part of the court judgment. My professional life flourished in the aftermath of the trial. The confidence I gained from successfully advocating for myself translated into stronger performance at work and better relationships with colleagues. My supervisor noted in my annual review that I had developed increased assertiveness and leadership qualities. That made me a more effective team member. The employee assistance program I had used during the stressful trial period led to a promotion to senior project coordinator, with a salary increase that made the financial independence I had fought for even more secure. The most meaningful aspect of my recovery was learning to build healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. My friendship with Dave, strengthened by his support during the trial, became a model for what family relationships could look like when built on genuine care and honest communication. We established traditions like monthly dinners and hiking, trips that were based on enjoyment rather than duty. Dating became possible for the first time in years. The therapy work I had done to understand toxic relationship patterns helped me recognize when I was repeating old behaviors versus building something healthy. My relationship with Sarah, a social worker I met through a mutual friend, developed slowly and honestly. with both of us bringing awareness of family dysfunction and commitment to creating something better. The legal victory also connected me with other adults who had survived family scapegoating. I began volunteering with a support group for adults from dysfunctional families, sharing my story and encouraging others to document their experiences and seek appropriate help. Group facilitator Dr. Maria Santos noted that my presence was particularly valuable because it demonstrated that legal remedies were possible for emotional and financial abuse, giving hope to participants who felt trapped by family dynamics. The most profound change was in my relationship with myself. The young man who had internalized his parents' message that he was ungrateful and demanding had been replaced by someone who understood his own worth and could advocate for appropriate treatment. Dr. Walsh's final assessment noted, "Mark has successfully transitioned from a victim identity to a survivor identity, with strong boundaries and realistic expectations for relationships." The apartment that had started as a symbol of independence became the foundation for a life built on my own values rather than my family's dysfunction. Holiday celebrations became gatherings of chosen family friends who appreciated my contributions, a mother who was learning to see me clearly, and a growing network of people who valued authenticity over appearance. The scared 19-year-old who had stood up to his father's public humiliation had become a confident adult who could build the relationships he deserved and help others do the same. 2 years after Judge Williams delivered her verdict, I'm sitting in my home office writing this story, looking out at a life I built from the ground up literally and figuratively. The legal battle that began with a humiliating dinner party has evolved into something much more significant, a complete transformation of how I understand family, boundaries, and my own worth. The immediate victory was important, but the lasting impact has been profound. The $37,000 in damages allowed me to build financial security independent of family support. But more importantly, it validated every sacrifice I had made and every contribution that had been dismissed. When people ask if suing my parents was worth it, I point to the documented proof that my experiences were real. My treatment was wrong, and my worth was legally recognized. My current relationship with family is complicated, but honest. My mother and I have built something entirely new, a relationship based on acknowledgement of past harm and commitment to better patterns going forward. Our monthly dinners are tentative but genuine, and her willingness to attend therapy together has created space for conversations that were impossible before the trial. She recently told me, "I'm learning who you really are instead of who I assumed you were," which represents progress I never thought possible. My father remains unchanged and distant, a choice that initially caused me grief, but ultimately brought relief. The exhausting cycle of trying to earn approval from someone fundamentally unwilling to give it has been replaced by relationships with people who appreciate me as I am. His continued insistence that he did nothing wrong actually validates my decision to seek legal remedies some people will never acknowledge their harmful behavior until forced to buy external consequences. The professional impact has been remarkable. My experience navigating family dysfunction and legal advocacy led to a career change into family mediation and conflict resolution. I completed a master's degree in counseling psychology with a specialization in family trauma and now work helping other adults document and address systematic family abuse. My client files include dozens of cases similar to mine, adult children who spent years normalizing mistreatment until they found the courage to demand better. The most rewarding aspect of my work is helping others understand that their experiences are valid and that legal remedies exist for financial exploitation and emotional abuse. Last month, I helped a 32-year-old woman document systematic favoritism that had cost her thousands in family business opportunities given exclusively to male siblings. Her case is pending, but she recently told me that simply having her experiences officially recognized has transformed her. Self-concept from family problem to person deserving respect. The ripple effects extend beyond individual cases. My story has been featured in family law journals and continuing education programs for therapists, helping professionals recognize signs of systematic family abuse that might otherwise be dismissed. As normal conflict, Dr. Walsh has used my case as an example in her training workshops, showing how legal validation can accelerate therapeutic progress for clients from dysfunctional families to anyone watching this who recognizes their own experience in my story. Your feelings are valid, your observations are accurate, and you deserve better treatment than you're receiving. Systematic favoritism, financial exploitation, and emotional abuse within families are real harms with real remedies. Document everything, seek professional validation, and remember that family relationships should be based on mutual respect, rather than obligation or fear. If you're hesitating because you're afraid of destroying the family, consider that families built on denial and dysfunction are already broken. You're just refusing to pretend otherwise. My legal action didn't destroy my family. It revealed what was already there and created space for something better to grow. The relationships that survived were strengthened by honesty, and the relationships that didn't survive were based on maintaining harmful patterns. For those supporting someone in a similar situation, believe them, validate their experiences, and help them document what they're observing. The most powerful gift you can give someone emerging from family dysfunction is confirmation that their perceptions are accurate and their feelings are reasonable. Your witness can be the difference between continued suffering and life-changing intervention. The scared young man who recorded his father's humiliation at a dinner party has become someone who helps others find their voice and demand the respect they deserve. Every case I handle, every person I help document their experiences, and every family that learns to function with honesty, rather than denial, represents a victory over the systems that enabled my own abuse. My father was right about one thing. I was ungrateful and grateful for systematic mistreatment, financial exploitation, and emotional abuse disguised as family loyalty. And I proved him wrong about everything else. I was absolutely worthy of being part of a family, just not the one he offered. The difference is that now I get to choose my family, build relationships based on mutual respect, and help others do the same. That's worth fighting for in court, in therapy, and in life. If this story resonates with you, please share it. Comment about your own experiences with family boundaries, and subscribe for more content about standing up for yourself and building the relationships you deserve. Your story matters. Your worth is not negotiable, and you have more power than you realize to create the life and family you deserve.